Hello and welcome to the final instalment in the ride home from Mittagong to Goulburn. The battery in the camera decided to run out of power about a block from my house, so you'll get to see the ride here from Marulan through into Goulburn and just about less than a kilometre from my house. Now, the views that I'm going to express and talk about in this video are not the views of the Motorcycle Action Group of the United Kingdom. They are simply my own opinion and my own interpretation and thoughts on some of the issues that they have raised. I want to be clear about that to my knowledge, they've not expressed any of these opinions. They're just my own thoughts. And so any comment that you might want to make should be directed to me or directed at me and the content that I've expressed rather than at the Motorcycle Action Group. Essentially, what I understand from the Motorcycle Action Group is that beginning in 2031 and by 2035, there will be no combustion engine vehicles sold in the United Kingdom, and no new combustion engine vehicles sold in the United Kingdom. That is, cars that people drive. I assume that heavy trucks and lorries and semi-trailers, as we call them in Australia, are exempt from that. But I don't have any information about that. But certainly all motorcycles appear to be, or combustion engine motorcycles appear to be, new combustion engine motorcycles appear as if they're going to be banned from sale in the United Kingdom by 2035. The government of the UK has taken the view that we want to try and meet our emissions targets, and the only way to do that is to have zero emissions at the tailpipe, and that seems to imply you can have any motorcycle you want or any car you want so long as it's electric. Now, I've talked about implications of all of that in the previous video, but there are still some issues to do with electric vehicles that I think need to be explored at least and talked about, and some issues put out there at least for discussion. The UK government, in my view, is in a unique position if they have taken this decision and if they follow through on this decision, and if as of 2031, small engine, that is the 50cc to 125cc motorcycles are banned. It's probably too late for them to make decisions that I'm going to suggest here, if they haven't already done it, in regard to electric vehicles, because already the scale of production is too big, already the sales, there are too many vehicles, and I feel that boat has sailed. But in the research that I have done, I find that there are only a few models or brands of electric motorcycles on sale in the United Kingdom, and sales are at quite a small level. They seem to represent similar brands to those that are available in Australia, and of the 10 most popular or best brands according to one of the car sites I looked at, there are only two that I've heard of, that is Harley-Davidson and BMW. Now, for context, the BMW CE04 electric motorcycle has a range of 130 kilometres, can be charged to 80% in 65 minutes, and costs $23,500 plus on-road costs. The Harley-Davidson Livewire has a range of 177 kilometres, can be charged to 80% in 75 minutes, and costs $23,700. Of the other motorcycles that are electric that are claimed to be available in Australia, there is one called the Evoque 6061 GT, which has a claimed range of 450 kilometres. It claims to be able to charge to 80% in 15 minutes, but it costs $52,900. Now, if similar models are available in the UK at similar prices, I suggest that they are at the moment out of people's range, but nevertheless, this is what I'm going to suggest. One of the big issues with electric vehicles, be they cars or motorcycles, is the minerals that are used to make the batteries. Those minerals are scarce, those minerals are expensive to mine, and we are told anecdotally that the extraction of those minerals, the mining of those minerals, may involve child labour, and certainly may involve people working in highly dangerous jobs in low-paid conditions in third world countries where there appears to be very little commitment to workplace health and safety or the sorts of conditions that we would expect to find in mines in Australia or the UK or other advanced countries. So, the United Kingdom government could have said, and could still say now, well, okay, as of 2031, when there are going to be no more small engine motorcycles unless they're electric, that we require the manufacturers of those motorcycles to certify to us that the minerals that are used to make the batteries in these motorcycles are, if you like, ethically sourced. In other words, there is no child labour involved, there is no slave labour, there's no exploitation of workers. They are paid a decent wage commensurate with what are appropriate wages for the country where the mining takes place, that the mines are give attention to workplace health and safety and issues like that. Now, the manufacturers might well argue, well, we don't make the batteries, we buy the batteries from somebody else. It doesn't matter where the battery comes from. The manufacturer of the motorcycle, if it's an electric motorcycle and has a battery, has to be able to certify, and those certifications have to be verifiable by, if you like, Department of Trade or Board of Trade or somebody or a government department having independent inspectors go to the country where the company says it sources the batteries or the chemicals, for the batteries are sourced, and verify the claims that are made. The CEOs of the motorcycle manufacturing companies that sell motorcycles into the United Kingdom ought to face fines and or imprisonment if they falsely certify these documents or those claims. Now, you might say, well, okay, the motorcycle manufacturing companies based in Japan or Thailand or Taiwan or whatever, where the British courts have no jurisdiction, and that is a factor. But then perhaps the UK government could say, well, if you are unable to provide us with certification that we accept, then we will simply ban the sale of your motorcycles into our country. So the British government or the UK government could create legislation that says as of 2031, when electric motorcycles are the only option in that small class, and certainly by 2035 when they are the only option in all classes, where sales are, as I said, about 114,000 a year, so it's not the huge numbers, not the 1.6 million cars that are sold every year, they could require companies to certify that the minerals that are used to make the batteries are properly sourced from places that do not involve child labour, exploitation of workers, that there are health and safety standards, and that wages are properly paid that are commensurate with the work that workers do, and so on. Now, the second issue is a more contentious one, and that is the biggest problem with electric vehicles is what happens to the battery when the vehicle is no longer fit for purpose. Now, when does that happen? I don't know, but I'll come and talk about that in a moment. But at some point, the battery is going to have degraded to the point where it is no longer viable to keep charging it because it just won't provide any sort of range that makes it worthwhile for a person to ride that bike. The same would happen with cars, of course. And when that happens, what happens to the battery? We're led to believe that just about every other part of the car can be recycled. The steel can be melted down, the glass can be shredded, this wiring can be, all sorts of things can happen to all the other parts of the car. But in Australia, at least, and I can't speak for anywhere else, but as I understand it, there are no mandatory recycling, repurposing or reuse of batteries, and they generally go to landfill, where they may or may not represent a fire or explosion hazard, but certainly one of the things that could happen to them is that the casing that the battery's housed in could rust, corrode, split, crack or whatever, and the chemicals that are within it could leach into the soil and end up in the groundwater. And I think we know enough about forever chemicals of all sorts to know that we don't want that to happen. So what could the government do? Well, in my view, if we use an example in New South Wales, let me illustrate my point. In New South Wales, if you have a new vehicle you don't have to have it checked for registration for the first 5 years. After that, you have to have an annual inspection to make sure that your vehicle is roadworthy. And I believe the Ministry of Transport in the UK requires vehicles to be inspected annually to make sure they're roadworthy in order to be registered. So what could happen is that most makers of electric vehicles warrant their batteries for somewhere between 6 and 8 years. Now, as I said in the last video, please check the fine print on the guarantee or the warranty of the car that you're buying to make sure exactly what is being warranted. But in the advertising, they talk about warranties for batteries which are separate from the rest of the car of 6 to 8 years. So let's say that you follow the five-year example in New South Wales, that after 5 years, your vehicle needs to be inspected annually. Part of that inspection could be a simple test to see how much the battery has degraded. Now, hopefully after 5 years it has degraded nothing. But annually after that, it could be inspected and a report provided to the owner to say, well, it's now degraded by 10% or 20% or whatever it is. There would be a point which the manufacturers would be able to tell you when you buy the car, and which scientists would be able to agree to say that when the battery degrades to, let's say for purposes of illustration here, when it degrades to 50%, in other words, it can only take 50% of the charge it originally could take, it is no longer fit for purpose. It can no longer be used to charge that vehicle because it just won't go anywhere on the 50% charge. At that point, the manufacturer would be required to buy back the vehicle at market value then, which would be probably nothing or very low, and undertake and again sign with a signed certificate to say that they have a plan for that battery to be reused, repurposed or recycled in such a way that it ceases to present, it would not present a danger to the environment for the chemicals leaking into the water supply or leaking into the groundwater or anything like that. Now, the recycling or repurposing could not simply be, well, we'll just build a warehouse and we'll put all the batteries in a warehouse. Because as we found with soft plastics in Australia, that's what happened. We all took our soft plastics down to Woolworths and Coles and thought they would be being recycled, but actually they were just being shoved in warehouses. It has to be a plan that says the battery can be repurposed to store electricity for domestic use or some other use, or the chemicals are extracted and reused in some way, rather than the battery just being left somewhere to sit and rot, possibly to rust or corrode or crack. And so the government legislation could say that. Now, let's say you have an inspection at 5 years and it says, well, there's no battery degradation. Let's say you have a battery inspection every year after that, and after 10 years it says there's no battery, there's 5% degradation or so on. I don't know at what point you would reach where you'd say, well, the battery has degraded to the point where it is no longer fit for purpose. But the manufacturer could define that. The battery makers could say that at this point, the battery will have, after X number of years, the battery will have degraded to the point where it is no longer fit for purpose. And at that stage, the manufacturer is required to take the bike back, the whole bike. Now, I said buyback before, so they could offer you, at that stage, it might be 10 years, might be 15 years, they could offer you a token amount of money, because let's be honest, after 10 or 15 years, your bike's probably not going to be worth anything anyway on the second-hand market. So they could offer you a token amount of money, take the bike back from you, and then they have to have a plan for the total recycling of that bike. Now, as I said, the tyres can be shredded, the metal can be melted down, the plastic can be crushed up and used again to make more plastic or whatever. It's the battery that's the problem. And the manufacturer or a third party that they might outsource it to has to certify, and has to certify with penalties of fines and possible imprisonment of the people who provide the certification if it proves to be false, that the battery is being repurposed, reused, recycled, not just put in a warehouse and left to rot, but it's actually being put to another use, or the chemicals have been recovered, or there is some way to make sure that battery doesn't just rot away and end up in the environment, end up becoming an environmental hazard. Now, I'm saying they could do this with motorcycles because if you're only selling something like 114,000 motorcycles a year, each manufacturer is probably not selling, there's not one manufacturer, I suspect, selling 50 or 60,000 motorcycles. So the numbers that each manufacturer is selling are relatively small compared to the 1.6 million annual sales of motor cars. And so the numbers that you're dealing with are considerably smaller than 1.6 million motorcycles on the road represents and the annual sales in new motor cars. So the numbers that you're talking about are relatively small compared to the total number of cars and the annual sale of motor cars in the United Kingdom, and therefore it's possible. Now, I'm saying that this could happen in the United Kingdom because this legislation or these regulations and rules appear to be going to come into effect in the United Kingdom. To my knowledge, there are no plans to do such a similar thing in Australia. There are no plans to have zero emissions at the tailpipe. There are plans to have reduced emissions, and the new vehicle emission standards that have come in are meant to progressively reduce the amount of emissions from the total fleet. But as I understand it, motorcycles are not covered by that in the first place because they're not classified as motor vehicles. They're classified as motorcycles. But even so, to my knowledge, there is no plan for zero emissions at the tailpipe at this stage. And that doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. And if it does happen in the future, then the things I've just said that the UK government could do and should be doing now, because they have a perfect opportunity to say to manufacturers, you've got 7 years from now to come up with a plan to do this, or we'll give you until 2035, and therefore you've got 11 years to come up with a plan. But in the meantime, if you start bringing in these 50cc to 125cc motorcycles and they're electric powered with batteries, then the things that I've just suggested will come into effect, and manufacturers must have a plan to deal with battery waste. All right, well, I think that's pretty well covers the point I wanted to make there. So we're just coming into the northern entrance to Goulburn at the moment, and we're coming up to some roadworks that are being done. I hope you've enjoyed the commentary and it's given you something to think about. I'm not at this stage saying I'm totally in favour of electric motorcycles or I'm totally against them. I'm not in a position to make that decision because I haven't ridden one, and I suspect that by the time I'm considering riding one, my riding days will be over. I did say I don't particularly care which or what fuel source is used to power my motorcycle. It's the enjoyment of motorcycling that I get. And if electric motorcycles were the only option, and I was still in a position to be riding when that becomes the only option, then I, of course, would seriously consider one. I think that idea of people saying, well, I really love motorcycling, but the government has said, I've got to have an electric one, and I don't want an electric one, so I'm not going to ride a motorcycle anymore. The government's not going to be hurt by your decision. The Prime Minister or your local member is not going to be hurt by your decision. You are going to punish yourself, and that seems to be foolish. It's like those people who said when helmet laws came in, well, they're now making me wear a helmet. I love riding a motorcycle, but I don't want to wear a helmet, so I'm not going to ride a motorcycle anymore. You're not hurting the people who passed that legislation. You're only punishing yourself. Anyway, we're coming into Goulburn. We've come past the northern entrance and that roadworks, and we're coming up towards Goulburn North School. I hope you've enjoyed the commentary and it's given you something to think about. If not, then I hope you've enjoyed the scenery and had a bit of a look at the northern entrance to Goulburn, which I know in some earlier videos that I had talked about but had said you missed out on because of the battery in the camera ran out. So you'll get to see that now. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll leave you to just enjoy the scenery for the last few minutes till we get to my home, and I'll talk to you when I'm making the next video.